The Seahawks take care of the 49ers in Week 8. We do a full Husky 2020 football preview just to have the first game canceled. And will Jamal Adams be back for Buffalo? Let's take it around the sound. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Around the Sound. It's episode 16. We're plugging along. Earlier this week, we did an interview with former Husky quarterback Damon Huard. We did a full 2020 Husky preview with him. It was a great episode. It was awesome. If you haven't watched that interview, go back and watch that episode 15 of Around the Sound. That one was, and we'll talk about the Husky game getting canceled briefly before we hop into a Seahawks-heavy episode, but I do want to mention, make sure you're following me on Twitter at @ThePeytonThomas and the podcast on Instagram at Around the Sound Seattle. Make sure you don't miss a beat. Of course, we have new episodes every Wednesday and Saturday of Around the Sound. You can watch every episode of Around the Sound. You can see my beautiful face on YouTube at PThomMedia. That's PTHOM space media. Or you can listen to Around the Sound wherever you get your podcast. Yeah, so we do the Husky preview. We get all hyped, ready to go, talk about all the analysis, everything that you need to know about the new head coach, the new offensive coordinator, the new quarterback, basically a rebranded Husky football team heading into the shortened 2020 season just for the first game against Cal to get canceled. Huskies were supposed to play Cal at 7:30 Pacific time this Saturday. I think it was 7:30 in Cal against the Golden Bears. That game getting canceled. Cal gets one COVID case, and the Pac-12 is being really strict about their COVID policy. I know Cal's coach Wilcox said players basically did everything they could and more to avoid getting the virus. I know those kids really wanted to play. I know everybody on Washington wanted to play, and this is just really unfortunate for both teams. I don't think there was any foul play, and what I mean by foul play is the players going out, doing something stupid, getting blasted or partying, and basically inviting COVID into the locker room. The way that it sounds, the way people are talking to the media, that's not really what happened here. And it's just really an unfortunate situation, and it's reminiscent of the 2020 and the current world we live in with COVID-19. So the Seahawks, or not the Seahawks, we'll talk about them later. The Huskies, are down to 5 regular season Pac-12 games now, including both Washington State in the Apple Cup and Oregon to finish off the season. And then if they advance, they will get to a Pac-12 championship and be able to play a 6th game. But it is unfortunate only to be able to play 5 games, maybe a maximum of 6 in a bowl game, really that shortened season with the Pac-12 starting so late on in this college football season. This may not even be the only game canceled. There is a possibility that the Huskies only play 3 or 4 games this season. I really hope that that's not the case. I hope that they make the Pac-12 championship, and I hope that they don't have any more games, especially postponed or, well, not postponed, canceled due to COVID-19. But the Pac-12 testing is strict. They're serious about it. They're keeping the kids safe, but it is unfortunate that we don't get to see any football, Husky football, this weekend. The next game is home against Oregon State on the 14th, I believe, and we will have to wait until the kickoff for 2020 Husky football until that game against Oregon State. All right, let's hop in and talk about the Seahawks because we did not get the chance to wrap up the 49er game earlier this week. So we'll be wrapping up Week 8 against the 49ers, and we'll also be previewing Week 9 against the Buffalo Bills. Comfortable win versus the 49ers, and an uncharacteristic win for the Seahawks. All of the narratives going into this game about how bad the D-line played, how every Seahawks win had to be a nail-biter, both of those got thrown out the window in this game. There was 30-7 at one point. The Seahawks were up 30-7 deep into the second half. The Niners got plenty of garbage time points, eliminated that deficit back to 37-27, the Seahawks' final score in Week 8. But the Packers also lost last week, which puts the Seattle Seahawks on top of the NFC. The Russ MVP train is back on track, and Russ has dominated the 49ers through his career. I mean, if you look at the statistics for Russell Wilson's just his passer rating, his touchdowns to interception ratio, his win-loss rating, he's faced a lot of really good 49er teams. Now, there was probably 2 bad 49er years in there. There were 2 bad teams where there was kind of this rotation, everything in between those Harbaugh teams and now these Kyle Shanahan teams. Everything in the middle there was a little bit not great, but Russell Wilson has been dominant over the course of his whole career. Whether the 49ers have been good or bad, he's been completely dominant against those teams and has really had their number. Russell Wilson had 4 touchdowns, no interceptions in this game. But I really want to talk about the receiver play because DK and Tyler made this work. Now, Tyler had an crazy fantasy game against Arizona, racked up 50 points, 52 or something points, 3 touchdowns, 1 million receptions. Well, this game we flip back to DK, and DK is the main focal point of the attack. He's the main guy that's making catches, going forward, scoring touchdowns. Tyler didn't have a terrible game, but he only picked up a few catches for sub 100 yards. DK had something like 12 catches, 150 some yards, and a couple touchdowns. DK and Tyler, that's what makes this team so special, and that's what makes this offense so dangerous, is who are you going to guard? If you're a defense, who are you going to guard? Because you probably have to double team one of those guys because both of them can beat you in one-on-one coverage. DK can beat you with his physicality and just his presence because he's such a monster as a physical human being. And Tyler will beat you with his speed and his ability to catch near the sidelines. We've seen Russell Wilson all the time just be able to put balls in a place where only Tyler Lockett can get to them, and Tyler Lockett can make these incredible toe tap drags all the time and catch all of those balls. So who are you going to guard? Because if you're going to double team one of them, fine, but the other one's still probably going to break that one-on-one coverage. If you double team both of them, that opens up a million opportunities to not only run the ball with your running back, run the ball with Russell Wilson, scramble out of the pocket because he is still a mobile quarterback. That's just what makes this offense so dangerous. Oh, and there's David Moore, who's had a really productive year, scored a touchdown against the Niners too. The Seahawks have never had this real dynamic before where they've had 2 number 1 receivers. And what I mean by that is there's really a class of receivers in the NFL that on most teams, they're going to be the number 1 wide receiver on the depth chart. And that's kind of what Tyler Lockett's been these last 3 or 4 years for the Seahawks. He's been the number 1 receiver on the depth chart, the reliable guy where Russell Wilson's in trouble. He's going to throw the ball away, but right before he does, he's going to look, and if Tyler Lockett, if his wide receiver 1 has just a little bit of daylight, a little bit of space, he's going to fire that ball in there, and he's going to trust that his wide receiver 1 is going to make that play, make that big play. He's going to rely on that guy to make those great catches week in, week out. The Seahawks have never had 2 wide receiver 1s in a really long time, and this is what they have right now. DK Metcalf is absolutely a wide receiver 1, but Tyler Lockett is still a wide receiver 1. There are not very many teams in the NFL that I can think of that have more than 1 wide receiver 1. Now, I know it's counterintuitive because on the depth chart, one of those guys inevitably has to be listed as a wide receiver 2, but if you're classifying them based on skill, both of those guys are absolute elite top-tier receivers, and it's really difficult as a defense looking at that offense. You can stop one of them. One of them's not too bad because you can double team him. You can throw different coverages at him. You can maybe put a man playing underneath, and then you have a zone safety playing over the top, playing that cloud coverage just in case you give a stop and go and he tries to break you deep. If you have 2 guys that are kind of monitoring that receiver, you can get away with it. But when there's 2 guys and you have to try to get both of those guys covered, you're using almost 3 or 4 defenders on every play to just take care of those 2 weapons. And the Seahawks offense is so dynamic that normally they can run the ball. Normally they have 2 tight ends available. Will Dissly, who's really made another big step in his career, and Greg Olsen, who's been an all-pro throughout his career. You have David Moore, who's a great wide receiver, to supplement those 2 guys. This game, there wasn't much run game. I mean, you had Chris Carson, Carlos Hyde, and Travis Homer all out. You had to rely on your rookie, DJ Dallas, to really get it done. And you relied on those big receiver plays. The run wasn't working for a big portion of that game. I think DJ Dallas did finally get his legs under him. We'll talk about him in a little bit. But you relied on those big plays from your wide receiver. Russell Wilson put the ball in the right spot, and it was DK this game. But DK kept coming down with the ball in the right spot and kept punishing the 49ers defensively. Let's talk about the offensive line because they really made this thing go. Yeah, the wide receivers were out there making the flashy plays, getting on the highlight reel. Russell Wilson had plenty of plays that belong on the highlight reel, but Pete Carroll and Brian Schottenheimer were talking to the media this week about just how good the Seahawks offensive line was, and I'm not sure if it was the coach, Pete Carroll, or if it was the OC, Brian Schottenheimer, but one of them said, this year, this Seahawks offensive line is avoiding mental mistakes, and I want to say, Germain Ifedi, coming off that offensive line, he played right tackle for the Seahawks for 3 or 4 years on his rookie contract. They finally let him go. He goes to the Bears. Having Germain Ifedi off that offensive line helps so much because so many of those mental mistakes, like penalties, like false starts or holding, or just blocking the wrong guy and somebody has a free shot at Russell Wilson, a free shot at the quarterback, Having Jermaine Ifedi off that line does wonders for your offense. Schottenheimer designs plays for Russell Wilson to get the ball out of his hands, because when the Seahawks were at their worst in 2016 or 2017, they missed the playoffs one of those years. When they were at their worst, it was Darrell Bevell's play calling that wouldn't get the ball out of Russell Wilson's hands fast enough, and it was also the offensive line that was having so many penalties and so many missed blocks. It was those mental mistakes. And these are the types of mistakes that the Seahawks offensive line is really, really eliminating. And I think Dwayne Brown, being a leader on that offensive line and being a veteran on that offensive line, he had a couple great plays on Sunday where he shred a blocker, went to go grab somebody else to supplement somebody who had the ball that was running behind him. Dwayne Brown's been playing really well, and I think he's definitely a veteran presence on that line that's teaching those younger guys, because other than him, there are parts of that offensive line that are really young. And I think Dwayne Brown's being that veteran presence, that guy that's teaching those younger guys exactly how to avoid those mental mistakes. I don't think Ifedi had a guy like that he could look up to until Dwayne Brown came in really late on in Ifedi's Seahawks career. But Dwayne Brown, I think, doing wonders for that offensive line. And the whole line, the cohesion, the communication. There were parts of that Arizona game that looked bad, but I think that was on the play calling. I think after watching this game, you can chalk that up to Brian Schottenheimer, and he admitted to the media after that loss, he admitted that it was the play calling. It was me, guys. It was the reason that Russell Wilson was getting free shots and getting hit all the time was me. It wasn't the offensive line making those mental errors. It was me trying to block the wrong people, and it just didn't work out. This game, we saw a huge comeback victory. Well, not a comeback victory. I meant a comeback from where the offensive line was last week in Arizona because of the play calling. They played so much better. They avoided mental mistakes. Russell Wilson's jersey had to be pretty clean by the end of that game because I thought they played really well. Let's talk about the running game. Of course, the opposite side of the pass blocking game is the run blocking game, but let's talk about the running backs. Chris Carson's out, Carlos Hyde's out, Homer's out. You're stuck back there with a rookie DJ Dallas. They did pick up Alex Collins, who played 1 year with the Seahawks a few years ago before going to Baltimore, but due to COVID-19 protocols, he was not ready for the Week 8 game against the 49ers, which means DJ Dallas, it was on him. It had to be him. He was the main focal point of the run game. He had to be the guy that got things done and got things moving for the Seahawks offensively in the run game. And let me tell you, after a drive, it looked terrible. I mean, the Seahawks come out, they get 3rd and out, they get the ball back on their own goal line, and they go 3rd and out again, I think, and it looked really bad. I mean, Russ kind of carried that offense out of the mud, and then they got going, but DJ Dallas is a little bit raw. I mean, he is a rookie. He's not used to being a workhorse yet. He's not quite ready for that workload yet, and I think he could get to that point. He definitely showed flashes, especially in the second half of that game where he had some great carries where I said, okay, this guy looks like he could be a draft pick that really pays off. He could be a guy that I think could take that workhorse role for the Seahawks at some point in the future, but he's young, he's raw, he's got a lot of work to do, and you saw that. It took him a little bit to get settled into that game. The Seahawks offense really struggled in the first 2 sequences out. I think the 49ers defense knew they were going to try to establish that run game with DJ Dallas. When it didn't work, they panicked a little bit. Russell Wilson did miss 1 or 2 throws early on in the game, but once Russell Wilson got that opening drive touchdown to DK Metcalf, the offense never looked back. Once DK Metcalf made that play, I think it was a 41 or 42-yard touchdown pass where he basically outran everybody on the field. He caught the ball on the left side, ran all the way to the right pylon, essentially, just beating everybody to the corner. After that play, it was pretty much the Seahawks offense was rolling for the rest of the game. The passing game was working, which meant there were more opportunities for DJ Dallas to find holes in the run game. I know Nick Bellore, the fullback, got a few carries and got a pass completion in a somewhat important sequence in the second or third quarter. So the running back play with those 3 guys out, yeah, when you play a better team than the 49ers, that's probably going to come back to bite you sometimes. Missing Carson definitely hurt in that first half. But I will say the Seahawks offense, Brian Schottenheimer, Russell Wilson, did a good job for supplementing all of those 3 losses. And I thought that we saw some good sparks out of DJ Dallas back there in the backfield. Let's talk about the other side of the ball. How well did the defense play? I mean, Jimmy Garoppolo was getting hit all game, and a lot of times it was Bobby Wagner, but it was some of those other guys too. This was the opposite of the Cardinals game. In the Cardinals game in Week 7, those Seahawks defensive line could not touch Kyler Murray. I think there was 1 pressure in 42 or 43 dropbacks. Kyler Murray had all the time in the world back there, tearing up the Seahawks and eventually won. Jimmy Garoppolo had no time. And Kyle Shanahan should be the guy, the offensive coordinator, the offensive genius. Well, he's the head coach, but he's a proclaimed offensive genius. He should be the guy that should try different things and be able to break that down, especially against a defensive line that really was not missing a lot of people. I mean, Snacks isn't playing yet. You have Carlos Dunlap, who's still in COVID protocol. Benson Mayoa, who had been playing probably the most snaps on that defensive line, also sidelined. You had a 7th-round tight end, Steven Sullivan from LSU this past year in the Seahawks draft, playing some snaps at defensive end. He makes his NFL debut as a defensive end when he was drafted as a tight end. So a lot of rotation going on in that defensive line. I thought it was better play calling from Ken Norton Jr., who I still have faith in. I still think Ken Norton Jr. is a pretty good defensive coordinator, and I don't agree with the calls for firing Ken Norton Jr. And Bobby Wagner took Jimmy Garoppolo out of that game. He had 4 quarterback hits, and he got him on that 3rd or 4th one. I'm not sure which one it was, but he got him, and I think that was the hit that Jimmy Garoppolo took his injury on. Eventually, the 49ers had to take him out of the game and put in Nick Mullins for the rest of the game. And Nick Mullins was more productive than Jimmy Garoppolo was, but it was really, really impressive to see the linebackers and the front 7 as a whole getting back there into the backfield, disrupting Jimmy Garoppolo, and really not letting him do anything. For the whole time that Jimmy Garoppolo was in the game, there was 7 points for the 49ers. They tried to do different things. They tried to pull out that wildcat formation once, but nothing really got going for the Niner offense, and Kyle Shanahan could not find a way to break Seattle down with Jimmy Garoppolo in the game. Once he had Nick Mullins in there, he started being a little more creative and started breaking down the defense and the secondary especially a little bit more. But the first 50 minutes of that game, the majority of the time Garoppolo was in there, really, really impressive stuff from the defense. Another note from the 49er offense is George Kittle was made a non-factor, and I'm not sure exactly how the Seahawks did that. I'll have to go back and watch the film. But George Kittle was made a non-factor for the majority of this game. And there was one moment, his one catch of the game, I believe, he was covered, double covered. Jimmy Garoppolo kind of just threw it up to him, and he made a pretty incredible catch for having 2 guys draped all over him. But on the way down, he gets injured. I think it was a broken bone in his foot. So he's injured for the rest of the year. Jimmy Garoppolo's injured for, I think, almost the rest of the year. And I think this might be the end of the 49ers 2020 season. I think they're going to limp into that 4th spot in the NFC West. They probably will pick up. They lost the Packers on Thursday Night Football, so they're sitting at 4-5 now. I wouldn't be surprised if they finish somewhere around 7-9, maybe 8-8, but 8-8 certainly seems like a stretch now. They've gotten through the easiest part of their schedule. They're going to have to start playing more divisional opponents, more tough teams going down the stretch. I think without Jimmy Garoppolo, without George Kittle, I think this is probably about the end of the 2020 49ers quest for 6, of course. Every year, quest for 6. So let's look ahead for the Seahawks now. They sit atop of the NFC West, like I said earlier in the episode, after the Green Bay Packers lost. So the Seahawks alone, the only team in the NFC with one single loss. I think everybody else in the NFC has multiple losses, at least 2 losses. Around the NFC West, however, the Cards had the bye this week, but the Rams lost to the Dolphins, and Jared Goff looked really bad. I think Jared Goff threw 3 or 4 interceptions. I think Brian Flores down there in Miami had a great game, and the Dolphins looked like a pretty good team. Tua looked pretty good in that game, but the Rams, Jared Goff, really threw that game away with his turnovers. The Rams defense tried to put the offense back in that game, but when the Rams struggle, it usually is Jared Goff not being an elite quarterback and looking fairly pedestrian, looking fairly average, and that good Rams defense could not really pull him out of that hole. So looking ahead for the Seahawks specifically into Week 9, an important game coming up in Buffalo. Josh Allen's having a great year. He's sitting behind a great offensive line there. The Buffalo Bills have had a great defense for a few years. They've kind of been waiting for the offense to take that next step. I think Josh Allen's taken a step forward this year. The offensive line's taken a big step forward this year. They picked up Stephon Diggs in the offseason. He's having a pretty good year up there in Buffalo. But the Bills are finally beating the Patriots and finally dominating the AFC East after about 20 years of Patriots rule, essentially. Patriots, a set lock for winning the division every single year. It looked like 2019 was probably the last year that was going to be the trend, be the case, with Tom Brady leaving, with Gronkowski. I know Gronkowski left a couple years ago, but with Tom Brady leaving, it looked like it might have been the nail in the coffin for the Patriots. They pick up Cam Newton. They pick up some players that you might think, all right, they might be a contender, but the Buffalo Bills coming off a win against the Patriots last week. Patriots dropped to 2-5, I think, and Buffalo is sitting at 5-2 or 6-2 and having a great year. It looks like might be Buffalo's division to lose at this point. And the only team really challenging them is the Miami Dolphins. So how about that? The Buffalo Bills and the Miami Dolphins sitting atop the AFC East. Alex Collins will be available for this game. He was not available for last week's games due to COVID protocol. So the Seahawks will have him back. They should have Homer back, and they will also have DJ Dallas. So despite Chris Carson being questionable and Carlos Hyde being out, the Seahawks backfield will be populated with more people than just that rookie DJ Dallas. Damon Snacks Harrison is closer to playing. Pete Carroll's been pretty silent on this issue. Snacks has been pretty silent on this issue, but I would not be surprised if we see him in this game. Should be interesting to see if the Seahawks decide to activate him for the Week 9 game in Buffalo. Carlos Dunlap, coming off the COVID protocol, should be ready to go, should be ready to rock and roll. Jamal Adams, coming off an injury, had a almost full week of practice this week. He was playing sort of on a pitch count all week in practice, and I would not be surprised if he's on a snap count in this game, only playing about half the snaps or so defensively. But it should be great to have him back. Should be fun to watch and see what the Seahawks do, whether they decide to blitz with him, blitz more because he's on the field. Jamal Adams, so great blitzing out of that secondary. Jamal Adams also a great cover guy, so it should be fun to have him back in the defense. Talking about the game specifically, a fun fact from Bob Condotta over there at the Seattle Times. The Seahawks have only played in Buffalo 3 times during their whole existence. Russell has never played in Buffalo. It is the only NFL city that Russell Wilson has not played in, except for Las Vegas, kind of being the exception because Russell Wilson did play in Oakland in his career. He has not yet played at Allegiant Stadium in Las Vegas, but Russell Wilson never played in Buffalo, so it should be pretty fun, a fun little nugget there of information. Let's talk about the storylines for the game. Now, the new defensive line, the new improved Seahawks defensive line, like we said, we don't know if Snacks will be activated yet. We know Carlos Dunlap will be in there. The defensive line actually looked competent last week and really forced Jimmy Garoppolo off his game and forced him out of the game. Well, that was Bobby Wagner, but the front seven as a whole going against a really good offensive line for Josh Allen and for the Buffalo Bills. Josh Allen has had plenty of time this year. Singletary and Zach Moss, the rookie out of Utah, had a great line to run behind. Both of those guys have found success in the running game up to this point. It's going to be a tough task for the Seahawks to stop all of those guys, get some pressure. You also have Stephon Diggs being a weapon out there in the receiving core. He's got some other guys around him to supplement that. He's been a great guy for Josh Allen this year. So it should be interesting to see which version of the Seahawks defense are we going to see in this game. Are we going to see the version of the Seahawks defense that played against Arizona where you get one quarterback hurry all game? Because that's been the reason that the Buffalo Bills have had so much success this year is Josh Allen really has not been hurried much at all. And I would not be surprised to see that offensive line for the Bills smother the Seahawks if they decide that they don't need to blitz. In the game against the 49ers, the Seahawks played really well. They blitzed 51% of the time, I think, which is a really, really high rate. If they continue to blitz, they continue to send extra guys at that offensive line, they continue to get in Josh Allen's face, I think it could be a really interesting game, and I think it could be really good for the Seahawks defense if they're able to set Josh Allen off of his game due to pressure. Josh Allen's a good quarterback, but he's not an elite quarterback. And when Josh Allen faces some pressure, that's when he throws interceptions. He's capable of fumbling the ball, taking a strip sack, throwing interceptions. If he's getting pressured, the reason he's been so good for a good portion of this year is because he's avoided that kind of pressure. In the games that Buffalo has lost this year, it's been Josh Allen turning the ball over when he's been put in sort of a difficult situation. That's what separates sort of the Josh Allens of the world to the Russell Wilsons of the world. Josh Allen doesn't really have that escape ability or that playmaking ability when he's under duress, when he's under pressure, when things break down. I'll also be curious to watch whether it will be DK or whether it will be Tyler that goes off. It's been kind of flipping back and forth. You had DK going off one week, then you had Tyler going off against the Arizona Cardinals, then you had DK going off this past week against the 49ers. It'll be interesting to see how the good Buffalo secondary, now Buffalo has probably one of the best secondaries in the NFL. It'll be interesting to see how the Buffalo secondary adapts to both of those guys being on the field and how they decide to cover both of those guys. Like I said, one of the best secondaries in the NFL. It should be fascinating to see if they try to stop them both or if they just try to stop one of them. I think if they try to stop both of them, I think David Moore could have a big game coming up in Week 9. For a while, I thought this was going to be the first game that Seattle lost. I think if Seattle had not taken that loss to Arizona down there a few weeks ago, I think this was probably the trap game going up into Buffalo where the conditions can be rough in November. Now, weather for Buffalo this weekend is supposed to be 60 degrees and sunny, so great news for the Seahawks there against a team who's used to playing in those hazardous conditions. But I really thought that this was going to be the first game that Seattle probably dropped of the year. After taking that loss to Arizona, that game sort of served as the wake-up call and changes were made. This team has Carlos Dunlap, maybe because they took that loss. I'm not sure the Seahawks go after Carlos Dunlap had they won comfortably in Arizona and gotten to Kyler Murray all the time. So with that wake-up call in Arizona, wake-up call to their problems, the Seahawks play calling's changed since that game. Their personnel defensively has changed. I think the Seahawks will probably be able to overpower the Bills up in Buffalo this weekend. But, I mean, Russell Wilson's got to continue to cook. I mean, he's had 4 touchdowns, 0 interceptions last week, but Arizona, that 3 interception game, he's got to keep cooking. He's got to keep throwing touchdowns and avoid those turnovers. I don't think we will see another 3 interception game from Russell Wilson this year. I hope that's still a fluke. We'll have to watch and see how Russell Wilson performs against a really good defense up in Buffalo. Last thing I wanted to get to today, speaking of letting Russ cook, he's cooking it up with the trademark. He is officially filed for the Let Russ Cook trademark, which is absolutely hilarious. And I cannot wait for this to go through and Russell Wilson to own the trademark and start selling stuff. According to the rumors, he wants to sell clothing with the Let Russ Cook mantra all over the place. He wants to sell cooking utensils as well. So you could have a Let Russ Cook cooking apron as well as a Let Russ Cook spatula in a few weeks. He's filed for that trademark. We'll have to wait till that goes through. I can't wait to see him start endorsing and kind of marketing that stuff all over his social medias. It should be hilarious to see him try to sell all that stuff because we are letting Russ cook here, and it's certainly fun to watch. Well, that's all we pretty much had to cover in episode 16 of Around the Sound, so thanks for sticking around. If you like me, you like the podcast, be sure to tell a friend. I'm always trying to expand my listener base, and we will be back here to wrap up Week 9 against Buffalo and preview Week 10 for the Seahawks. We'll also preview the Washington Huskies game next Saturday against Oregon State. The Sounders have Decision Day this weekend, and we'll be getting into the MLS Cup playoffs. We'll also have to talk about that next week, so we have plenty of things to look forward to. The news cycle keeps on turning, and we should have a really fun couple episodes coming up here on the Round the Sound. So, stay safe, and thanks for listening.